Today we are in the Cedar Creek room in the State House and taking a look and talking about, I won't say a new painting to the building, but a painting that has not been in our possession for a little while. This is Major General William Farrar Smith, better known as Baldy Smith, Civil War general. And this painting, interestingly enough, is actually a shared painting between us and Johnson State College, and we have a dual custody of it, and for about the last decade or so it's been at Johnson. So we've gotten it back just recently here in the State House, and this is where it hung many years ago, so we're very excited to have it back. Now a little bit of information about General Smith. He was, his friends called him Baldy, and that stuck with him throughout his whole life. He was born in February of 1824 in St. Albans, and he was the cousin actually of Gregory Smith, who was the governor of Vermont from 1863 to 1865, so during the Civil War. Smith was educated locally, and then he went on to West Point, to the United States Military Academy in 1841, and graduated fourth in a class of 41 cadets. Early in his military career, he did a lot of surveying. He was around the Great Lakes. He was in Texas, Arizona, Florida, actually in Mexico for a while. One of the events that happened during that time that would plague him for the rest of his life is when he was in Florida, he was stricken with malaria. And he would recover from that, but the illness affected his physical health for the rest of his life off and on, and that came back potentially to play a role in his experiences during the Civil War. Prior to the Civil War, he had kind of finished up as the engineer secretary of the Lighthouse Board, dealing with lighthouse services at the time, and he was twice a professor of mathematics at West Point, 2 different times in the 1840s and the mid-1850s. During the outbreak of the Civil War, he helped organize the 1st Vermont Brigade and was appointed a lieutenant colonel in the regular army for his gallantry at the Battle of White Oak Swamp in the 7 Days battles. This portrait of General Smith actually sits right across in the corner of the Cedar Creek room from our portrait by Julian Scott of the rear guard at White Oak Swamp, and Baldy Smith is prominently displayed in the center of that painting as well. I should note that this is also a Julian Scott painting. It's the 4th Julian Scott painting that we have here in the Cedar Creek room now, and Julian Scott was a Johnson resident, had grown up there, which is why Johnson State was so interested in having a piece of his as well. In 1862, on July 4th, Smith received a promotion to Major General in the Union Army, and he led his division with valor during the Battle of Antietam, and went on to, when his commander at the time, William B. Franklin, was reassigned to a superior command, Smith was actually placed at the head of the 6th Corps of the Army of the Potomac, and helped lead a group during the Battle of Fredericksburg, which ended up being a huge debacle, large Union casualties, a major defeat, and after that President Lincoln was largely attacked in the press and by politicians for the failings of Union leadership during that battle. It had really gone sour in a hurry for the Union Army, and there were a lot of repercussions that came from that. Some of those recriminations that followed the Fredericksburg battle, there was famously a general order in which the commander, Major General Ambrose Burnside, proposed that he was going to dismiss several of his senior officers of the Army. President Lincoln prevented this from happening, but he did actually instead relieve Burnside of his command. And it was said that Smith was one of the kind of affected officers, and it was to his credit that he did not leave the Army after this happened, but decided to stick with it, even though he felt like maybe he was being wrongly accused of some of the things that had happened that day under his command. George McClellan had also been involved in that, and he was certainly out of favor with President Lincoln, and he lost his command as well in his rank. As part of the fallout, though, Smith was not, although he was up for a promotion, the Senate failed to confirm his nomination when it expired to maintain the role of general, and he reverted back to brigadier general, and his command was dropped to the group that he was commanding. In 1863, he was assigned to duty as a chief engineer of the Army of the Cumberland, which soon after became the military division of the Mississippi, and he conducted what was widely seen as a brilliant engineering operation, first launched during the Battle of Brown's Ferry, and that opened up what was called the Cracker Line. He was able to break through and open up a line that provided supplies and reinforcements to the besieged Union troops in Chattanooga, which many agree, saved the Army from starvation and surrender during that battle. And Smith was now again nominated for the rank of Major General Volunteers, and Ulysses S. Grant went to bat for him and strongly insisted that that go through, and the Senate confirmed him that way. So his career has kind of gone up and down so far, and it would continue to do so throughout his service. During the Overland Campaign of 1864, he was assigned to command the 18th Corps in Major Benjamin Butler's Army of the James. They did not have great results at the Battle of Cold Harbor, and then in their first operations against Petersburg, there was a bit of a siege, and Smith kind of lost his wits about him, maybe kind of lost his will to move forward. They're not entirely sure what happened, but thinking back to kind of the debacle that Cold Harbor had been, Smith really performed a ton of reconnaissance to try to get a sense of what was happening at Petersburg and who was where. He determined that sections of the defensive line were manned primarily by artillery, and he ordered an attack, but the attack was delayed. In the meantime, he started to become apprehensive, started to second-guess himself. There was a rumor circulating that Robert E. Lee was about to arrive, and that had him a little bit unnerved. And he lost his nerve, and no one is completely sure what it was, whether it was the sort of formidable character of the Confederate works around Petersburg that he didn't think he could break through, but there is a lot of thought that he had a recurring bout with malaria at that time and was really sort of suffering physically, and maybe wasn't in the right state of mind to really make the important strategic decisions that needed to happen. His hesitation by not moving forward at that time, a lot of people have said may have missed out on the opportunity to shorten the war by nearly a full year. So that was a major decision he made that had some real consequences, and it did for him as well. On July 19th of 1864, he was relieved of his command of the 18th Corps, and he spent the remainder of the war on quote-unquote special duty. So this is someone who had an incredibly interesting career during the Civil War, with great victories and incredible defeats, and rising through the ranks and falling through the ranks up and down throughout his time there. In 1865, he resigned from volunteer service. In 1867, he resigned from the U.S. Army. And from there, he went on to a civilian life where he served as the International Telegraph Company president. He served on the Board of Police Commissioners in New York City, becoming their president in 1877. And in the 1880s, engaged in civil engineering work around Pennsylvania. He died in Philadelphia in February of 1903. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And a very beautiful piece, a great piece. We're very excited to have it back here in its place here in the Cedar Creek Room, and certainly a really interesting and sort of conflicted figure in the Civil War, depending on your take on him. Again, he did a lot of things right, and he did a lot of things wrong. So one of those people that certainly showed those different human qualities, and perhaps some of that was based on that malaria that he had caught early on in his life, in his career in the Army. So drop by the State House and see it. We anticipate hopefully having this in the building for quite a while and not leaving, but it is back where it rightfully belongs.
Great. Can you tell us about this?
Sure. So we decided to do a rainbow because a lot of people think of a rainbow as like representing peace and kindness and happiness. And we thought that Martin Luther King Jr. really kind of tried to put that out in the world.
That's a great concept.
And then we put a picture of him just to thank him for doing all of that for us and for being a kind of person that would help us figure out how to have equal rights for everybody and lead marches. And we actually watched a movie last week about him marching from Selma to Montgomery, and watching him speak and stuff like that.
He did not let anything get in his way in life.
That's great. How long did it take to do this?
We messed up the quote.
We messed up the quote like 5 times.
The quote? Was that the hardest part?
Because we thought it was the arc of the moral universe is longer, always wins towards justice, and then we did our poster and then wrote always on it. Then we had to redo it, and it was really annoying.
And then we spelled toward wrong, and we didn't put enough room for quotation marks at the end.
Well, it looks beautiful now. You did a great job. Well, thank you very much.
Here's their awards.
You want to do the awards right now? Sure. So, we'll present these to both of you. And why did you do it together?
Well,
We just work together really well.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Can you guys stand with the government?
Yeah.
Be by your post and stand by your poster? That would be awesome. Maybe can you here spread out so we can see the poster? Here we go. There. You got it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Leanna?
Leanna, you want to come up? And Leanna's from Stanford. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
So for my poster, I decided to use symbolism, and one day I just decided, like, you know how when you kick a ball, it arcs in the air. So the arc of the moral universe, I applied to a soccer scene, and
Do you play soccer?
yeah.
And so, tell us about this one in particular.
So, I used the soccer ball, when it went into the net, it symbolizes how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., when he basically like wins the moral universe. So, it's just like in this scene, in the soccer scene, it's winning the game, but Dr. Martin Luther King is winning the moral universe.
So the goal is justice, right?
Yeah.
And so the soccer ball represents getting there in the arc to get
Yeah.
there. Yeah. It's a great concept. How long did it take you to do it?
Probably like from when I first found out about the contest until like maybe a few weeks before I sent it.
And how many versions?
I think 3.
3?
Yeah.
That's great. And what was harder, doing the artwork or doing the essay?
Probably the artwork.
The artwork.
Yeah.
Well, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
So there you go. Want to come a little bit closer? We'll get this with the here pictures. Congratulations, Leanne.
Thank you.
Elizabeth Cunningham, Governor.
Elizabeth,
Yeah.
tell us about this.
Well, I just like did puzzle pieces because like they're kind of abstract, and all Martin Luther King seemed abstract to like some people at first, but once he really like made them happen and he put them together, then people started to understand the goal he was trying to reach, which was like justice for all. And then I did the puzzle pieces for a lot of reasons, but one of them was that they grow, so they go from smaller to bigger, because his ideas gained acceptance over time, so they grew bigger and they grew intellectually. And then I did the puzzle pieces also because like at the end they form kind of one puzzle with justice, peace, community, and integrity, 4 of his big ideas. And they form one community, almost like Martin Luther King was trying to make everyone come together in one community. And
You did a great job, and it's a great concept. And I love the way you put this together. And you can always continue to build, right? With all the pieces of the puzzle. And difficult to put them all together. But you, how long did it take you to do the?
I don't know, I did it over a course of like probably about a week. And it took me, so it took me a little while.
How about the essay?
The essay took me 2 or 3 nights to write.
Was that harder than the drawing?
Yeah, I think the essay was harder than the drawing.
Well, you did a great job. Congratulations.
And go ahead. There's a plaque for Elizabeth personally, and then there's a traveling trophy that will go to her school. So
Great.
it'll be here for this year.
Well, it's Jim Douglas, a former state bureaucrat and legislator here in Montpelier with a class full of brilliant Middlebury College students. We're studying Vermont government and politics, and today is our field trip to the State House to see our legislature in action. Not a lot of excitement at this early stage of the session, of course, but the students are spending a lot of time in committees, which is where the action really is. They were privileged to have a meeting with Governor Scott a short time ago and had some really good questions for him. He took the opportunity, as you might imagine, to encourage all of them, Vermonters and non-Vermonters alike, to remain in the Green Mountain State after they graduate. Obviously, the demographic challenge we're facing is profound, and we have to encourage as many young people as possible to find opportunities here and make this their home for the rest of their lives. It's an exciting time in our state's history, some real challenges out there, but the good news is that the governor gave a great inaugural address. He was quite conciliatory, reached across the aisle, and will do everything he can to work with the majority of the other party to bring some policy-based solutions to the challenges that the state is facing. So let's all pull together. We have different views on different ideas, different issues, but in the end, we're all Vermonters and want what's best for the state that we love.
Hello, I'm Beth Pearce, the State Treasurer. I'm at the State House, and we have a full agenda with the legislative body this year. We're working on pensions and making sure that we fully fund our pensions and our pension and our health care liabilities, working on programs to improve the cost effectiveness of those for the taxpayer. And I think we've had some great success working with our partners in the legislature and with the administration. Water, clean water is also an issue we're looking at this year, and anxious to see the proposals and be part of that dialogue. As you know, the Treasurer's Office created a study in January of 17, and we're hoping to see further progress in that area. The other major bill for us will be the Unclaimed Property Act, which is a consumer protection act, and making sure that people get their property when they've lost that. Might be a bank account they forgot about or an insurance policy, and making sure that we have proper safeguards in place to get those monies back to the rightful owner. So we expect a full agenda this year. We're very pleased with the tenor and the work that people are doing. It's a very far cry from what you see in D.C. at the moment. Love the collaborative working relationship and looking forward to a successful year.
Hello, my name is Cynthia Browning. I'm the state representative from Bennington 4, which is Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and most of Sunderland. I serve on House Ways and Means. And what I'd like to talk about briefly today is a way of using the special provisions in the tax code to try to address some of the problems that we have in Vermont in terms of clean water and preventing pollution of our waterways, and also the fossil fuels issues, climate change, carbon taxes. Most of the time people will talk about putting a tax on carbon, which means a tax on gas or a tax on heating oil or something like that. Or they'd say, well, let's put a tax on chemical fertilizer so that the farmers use less and less of it ends up in the lake. But putting a new tax on things is really hard, and it can also have inequitable burdens. If you put a tax on residential heating fuel, that would really hurt a lot of Vermonters. And even if you said you were going to give someone some of it back, it would be really scary to people. So what I want to do is I want to be looking at ways in which we give businesses tax deductions and exemptions that in effect subsidize the use of things that pollute the air or water. So that we wouldn't be imposing a new tax, we'd be removing a subsidy. And I think removing a subsidy may be easier than putting on a new tax. Because remember, with a subsidy, that means that all the rest of us are either getting less in services or paying more in taxes to make up for the taxes not collected because some entity has an exemption or a deduction. Let me give you an example. If a business buys fuel to run the machinery in their factory, they're making something and they have to have a big machine that makes the conveyor belt go, or it runs the robots or something like that. they do not pay a sales tax on the purchase of that fuel. It could be diesel or gasoline or some form of oil that anybody else would pay the sales tax on. They don't pay the sales tax because they're using it in manufacturing. Why would we want to have a fossil fuel use exempt from the sales tax? Why not impose a sales tax there so that the manufacturer has an incentive to use less? And then they might end up paying the same total cost, even including the tax, because they're using less. And what we want in terms of carbon tax and pollution and climate change, we want people to use less fossil fuels. So you have a subsidy, you have what's in effect subsidizing the use of fossil fuels. You take that subsidy away, people will use less, and that's what we want. And it wouldn't really matter how much revenue we're getting. We're not necessarily, we're going to do something with it, but you don't have to line it up with giving it back to the same people, because the businesses may have the same total cost. They use less, even with the tax, their total cost is the same. Businesses also can deduct a lot of expenses from their corporate income tax. If you're a corporation, you pay a corporate income tax, a percentage of your income, but you can deduct things from that income. You can deduct the cost of the goods you produce. So that means the fuels, that means the chemicals, that means anything that might be polluting. Why are we subsidizing the use of those materials? Why not remove that deduction for those materials, and then people will use less? Particularly because if you take the subsidy away from fossil fuels, renewable energy looks better, or efficiency, or conservation. Excuse me. So this is a different way of approaching it. I don't have everything worked out. Parts of it may or may not work. But I think it shows how important it is to really understand the systems that we have when you try to change it. Because most people just say, well, let's put a tax on top of this, on top of everything else. It's also possible that if you put a carbon tax on business fossil fuel expenses, they might be able to deduct the carbon tax from their corporate income. So you're not going to change their behavior at all. So you really need to look at the details of the tax code, and it's only since I've been here like 10 years that I finally understand it well enough to be able to see those things. So to be continued. I don't know how feasible, viable this approach will be, but it's really important to me that people see that we might be able to do something to get at these really important issues of clean water or climate change without imposing new taxes, just by removing special deductions and exemptions that are already in the code. And I think that politically that would be easier to do than putting on a new tax. So I'll come back and let you know how it turns out.
Hi, good afternoon. Representative Diane Lanpher here. I am from Addison 3, which I represent Ferrisburg, Vergennes, Panton, Waltham, and Addison. And I sit on the House Appropriations Committee. And wanted to get everybody caught up on maybe where we're at on the BAA, which is the Budget Adjustment Act. So what our committee right now has been really focused on 100% is rebalancing the budget from last year, the 2019 budget, which since we left here, there are things that happen that are unexpected expenses. There are things that happen that provide us with unexpected reductions in the cost. So we rebalance those things every year first. However, yesterday, and in July particularly, the revenue forecasting, which basically what I call is balancing the checkbook, what we establish as the known amount of money that the state has to work within the budget, was upgraded. Now there's a word you don't hear me say very often, and I've been here, this is my 6th term, and I've been through what would be called the Great Recession. So I've been around here long enough that most always there's been a minus sign next to everything. So it is a welcome time that we actually have a bit of an upgrade. In the out years, however, this is we're cautioning ourselves, is that there is looking like it's going to level. But right now we have some additional money that, besides rebalancing, we're looking into what do we do with and how do we best serve Vermont taxpayers with these one-time additional dollars. and that's what we're looking at. And I would say consensus in the committee and possibly everywhere else might be, you know, that the best place to do that for taxpayers is to put it on the debt. Debt that the state owes is going to provide the taxpayers the greatest savings out in the out years. But there are one-time investments that we need to look at to say, could this benefit families, employers, businesses right now in Vermont that we could look at one-time investments. So that's where we're at. We hope to have it out on the floor next week. Thanks.
Greetings, this is State Representative Mike Mrowicki. I'm from the Wyndham 4 District of Putney, Dummerston, Westminster, and we are located down in what we call the Southeast Kingdom of Vermont. We're on the border of Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and Wyndham County is the eastern gateway to Vermont. At the start of this session, there were three main pieces that I was hoping to address this session. The first was what we're dealing with and what we consider the non-compliance with Act 46. And by that I mean Act 46 was designed to save money and create equity. And one of the things that we wrote into the law was flexibility for different kinds of structures to governance structures to accommodate different situations. As the rollout started happening, the first wave of mergers went pretty smoothly because people were wanting that, and there was less difficulty in finding what they wanted to do. In my towns, the three towns that I represent, not so easy. We're in a supervisory union that's worked very well for 50 years, and right now the goodwill that we've had has pretty much been lost, and that's a shame. There was a structure put together by a merger committee that was then put to the voters, and the voters by an overwhelming majority said no, that's not what we want. Another group put forward an alternative governance plan, and that was rejected by the Agency of Education. The challenge right now is, can we find a middle way? Many of us thought Act 46 had the flexibility for alternative governance plans, but the Agency of Education and State Board of Education doesn't seem to agree. So what's happened is there's court cases that are trying to settle this. Many of us are trying to preclude the need for court cases, and hopefully we can find a middle way that, first of all, let's push back the deadlines and see if we can't find a way to solve this without having to go to court. Hopefully that'll give us time to take a good look at those alternative governance plans that were put together, and let us work together to get to that point. Another piece that I've been interested in working on is next steps in common sense firearms reforms. I'm one of the three lead sponsors of a bill that would create 72-hour waiting periods for firearm purchases. States that have this have seen there's been a reduction in domestic violence shootings and suicides. And often in these cases, there's a little bit of a waiting period, a cooling off period for somebody who might otherwise doesn't own a gun and wants to go out and buy one and do something drastic. That waiting period can save lives. I believe, and many of us do as well, that if we save one life, this is worth it. So that's another piece that I'm looking for, and of course many of us are very concerned with what we're experiencing is climate chaos. We feel like we can take some climate actions that would help Vermont do its part, spread that across the country, and provide the leadership at the grassroots level, at the state level, that's not happening on a national level. We need to do something. We want to have a brighter future for those who will come after us, and there's things we can do right here at the local level, starting with many of the homes in Vermont are older homes. Button them up and we stop heating the outside and we save money on the inside. The other thing we want to do is create some incentives for more electric cars, and then make sure that our electric producing portfolio is clean. Three main things. There'll be other things that'll come up, but hopefully as we move deeper into the session, things will become more clear for what we're going to do next, and we'll continue to serve the people of Vermont as best we can. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to share.
Hi, I'm Curt McCormack, member of the House from the city of Burlington. My district is downtown Burlington and the Old North End. I've just become chair of the House Committee on Transportation, and I am hoping to shift our emphasis more to mass transit, public transit, and bicycle and pedestrian transportation, and the electrification of our transportation system. None of these ideas are new, and they all are moving along, but not fast enough to have an impact on our CO2 emissions from transportation. As a matter of fact, our emissions are increasing, which is hard to believe with all the things we've done, but we obviously have not done enough, as our CO2 emissions statewide are actually on the rise. So I'm really hoping that the public can help us, especially the rural public, where so many people say they'd like to take a bus but they can't, or it just doesn't make sense, or they tried and the bus doesn't serve their area, doesn't serve their needs, where they need to go. Take too long, it's not reliable, and we have to figure out how to make transit work in a rural area. I'm convinced it can, but I really don't know how yet. And I live in Burlington, and it certainly works in Burlington, but it does not work so well in a lot of other places. And I'd like to make a pitch to those people, those Vermonters who are active environmentalists, because one thing transit needs is it needs ridership to be increasing, not decreasing. And most environmentalists talk about the need for mass transit, talk about why it doesn't work, but I don't know how many of those folks are riding mass transit. And that's a community of people that we can tap into who can increase the numbers. We don't need any failures. We don't need to put a new bus line on that does not have good ridership. And even if we give it a year or two of promotion and development, it still has poor numbers. We don't need that if we're trying to increase our transit system. In other words, the more conservative-minded, why should they agree to put more money into transit if people are not using it? So please, if you're interested in it, use it. It's not so inconvenient. You read on it. The longer buses, the bus I take down here to Montpelier from Burlington has Wi-Fi. It's comfortable. I wish it had a bathroom. They don't have bathrooms yet. The distance isn't quite great enough. But it's a popular run, as people know, and those are the reasons it's popular. So please use transit and help us figure out how to shift this emphasis and make our communities more walkable, make people feel safe on bicycles. I have so many friends that say they'd love to ride a bike, they used to ride a bike, but they're not going to now, they don't feel safe. That needs to change. We need to make bicycle riding safer. We need to make the rider feel safe when they're on the bike. And obviously, pedestrians, it's the most basic form of transportation, should always be number one. We should not build anything that makes walking more difficult.